This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On March 3rd, Military History Night featured a joint presentation by Canadian TV icon and helicopter pilot Dini and filmmaker Kate Campbell on the seldom-told story of women pilots who ferried the heavy bombers to Britain during World War II. Boundless.
So now, without further ado, a warm welcome, and Kate and Dini, the floor is yours.
I'm going to take the floor first, and then I'm going to give it over to the fabulous Kate Campbell. I touched something, didn't I? Can I close this computer, or will that cut it off, Kate? It's yours. Oh, it's not Kate's? It's yours?
Yeah, it's going to cut off.
It's going to cut off. So I'll just stand over here and be very, very careful. I can close it and put things on top of it? You can see it's amazing that I flew a helicopter, right? Because technically, if I'd ever had to fix the damn thing, I would not be here to tell these stories. Trust me. Okay, I can just lie to me and it won't make that noise again. Your name is? Max, I'm holding you completely responsible for everything you've just said. How many pilots are in the room? Oh, and how many of these pilots are helicopter pilots? See, they are a special breed, helicopter pilots. I never intended to be a pilot. I never thought about aviation. I never dreamt about it. I never read about it. I never saw it in a movie. It was not in my world. One day, it just walked into my life. Now, there was a book written recently by Elon Musk's mother, and it says, "A Woman with a Plan." I was a woman with no plan. I didn't know women were supposed to have plans. But you have to remember that I was born January 15, 1945, during a bombing raid in England to a very brilliant woman who is not only with the British Intelligence Corps, but she was smart enough to marry a Canadian soldier. So 3 months later, because the bombing went on every night, they shipped us out and we landed, like all the other immigrants, in Halifax, and here I am today. But women who were born in my time, life was laid out. It was extremely simple for us. You were going to learn to cook, and you were going to get married, and you were going to have kids, and you were never going to get a divorce, and it didn't matter if you went to university because you didn't need a career. You were just going to get married, so just go do it. I didn't fit in quite to everything that anybody planned. Interesting enough, I got thrown out of every high school I went to for talking. No one mentioned it could be a career move. Behind University Avenue, one street over St. Patrick's Street, my father was in the Canadian film unit. He was a still photographer and a cinematographer. When the war ended, he worked for the National Film Board. We moved to Toronto. My mother became Canada's first talent agent. And she fortunately had her agency in the front room of our house. So after I got thrown out of high school, I went to work for my mom, and then right behind university, at 121 St. Patrick's Street, I went to work at a building that was called Peterson Productions. Dean Peterson directed the first television commercial made in this country. I was on the set, and I was the go girl. Go for coffee, go for this, go get that, go do that. Dean was a genius. He was also an episodic alcoholic, which meant that every 3 to 4 months, Dean was gone for about 10, 12 days. We went to LA to shoot a huge pool of commercials. I was the producer. Big break for this kid. I'm on the plane. We're 5 minutes from takeoff. There's no Dean on the plane. Finally, I look up and there's Dean coming down the aisle, absolutely hammered, rocking off both seats. It was an incredible introduction to showbiz. Shortly thereafter, Dean closed the business. He came for money. Do you guys remember Mecca ointment? We're going way back here in history. Mecca ointment, yes. You could eat it. It would cure everything, and it was sold literally at sideshows, and the family made a fortune. He came from that money. When Dean retired, yours truly is out of a job. And so a dear friend of mine who was a model and worked at my mother's agency called and said, Dini, I'm going to buy you lunch, and we're going to figure out what you're going to do for a living. Two words in life that fascinate me: destiny and fate. Destiny, the definitions I use, I learned from Sister Margaret at a luncheon 20 years ago. And Sister Margaret says, and I agree, the destiny is what we create by the choices we make. And fate is what life puts in the way. And you cannot argue with fate. For obvious reasons, I've come to believe that fate is female, because when she's having a bad day, what a bitch. So fate decides that I'm out of a job. The destiny part of my becoming a pilot happened when I was 17, when I chose to forge my mother's signature to a piece of paper so I could go skydiving. You had to be 18, but that wasn't going to stop me. I jumped out of an airplane 55 times. This will indicate that I'm not the brightest bulb in the drawer. I never once went out of an airplane going, God, this is so much fun. My heart was pounding. I was sure the leg straps were open. I checked them 3 times going up because I was sure I'd get out, the chute would open, and I'd go down. I finally decided I got to give this up because I'm not having a great time. But that became my ace in the hole. That choice I made at age 17 when I was out of a job later on. Because Peggy took me to George's Spaghetti House. Used to be a big watering hole for showbiz people. We went upstairs and we sat down, and literally as we're having lunch, 3 guys came in from CKY radio. And we knew one of them socially. His name was Tommy, and as Tommy went by, I said, hello, Dini. And he knew I'd done some skydiving. Traffic reports are all over the place right now. They were brand new then. There was a helicopter traffic reporting war in Toronto. Every radio station had 2 helicopters, and each one was a guy who did the flying and a guy who did the reporting, except at CKY, where Bob Carter did both. And one day, God bless you, Harvey Clark, came out, the PR guy, and said, I know how we're going to win this war. We're going to get a girl. We're going to put her up in a pink helicopter. She's going to wear pink, and we're going to give her a pink car. She'll do both. You go and find her. Meanwhile, back at the lunch at George's Spaghetti House, Peggy and I are like, I don't know. Peggy's like, what are you going to do, Dean? I go, I don't know, Peggy. I can't be a secretary. This is obviously long before spell check. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I want to be challenged. At the other table, their problem comes up. Where are we going to find a girl to fly this helicopter? Tommy Vradenberg looks over and he says, see that girl? That's Dini Petty. Now I know she's crazy enough to jump out of an airplane. Maybe she's crazy enough to fly a helicopter. Literally, as he's walking to my table, Peggy has said, what are you going to do, Dean? I'm like, I don't know, Peggy, but I want to be challenged. I want to use my brains. And there was a tap on my shoulder, and I looked up and I heard the words that changed my life. How would you like to be the girl in the pink helicopter? Sure, yeah. I walked into a man's world. I was 23 years old. The guys had bets on how long I'd last. Guys were angry because some wanted the job. It was a very difficult time. But I have perseverance in my side, and so I just buckled down and went at it. I had destiny and fate. I believe so strongly in these things. I'm on my 2nd set of 9 lives. I have used up 10 of them. I have had, 9 close calls and 1 experience I would call a certain death, which is unlike a near death. I'm trying to think of an example. Let me go back to my my skydiving days. Most people in the military have made a jump. You guys know what happens when, people jump. You guys, in military, they get out pretty low, 1,200 feet. We got out lowest at 28. In the morning, they would drop over the target a streamer. It's weighted at this end. They would see which way the wind blows. You know this. And if this is the target and it's gone here, you get out here, and if you run with the wind and you get out here, you should land here, right? If you're too close, a canopy has its own forward speed, 10 miles an hour. If the wind's 10 miles an hour, you're running with it, you're going 20 miles an hour. But if you turn against it, you pretty much come straight down. It's I don't know what jump I'm on, 35 or 7. And I would stay with this couple. I'd babysit their kids in exchange for sleeping in their tent so I could go jumping. And he was taking me up. He's a jump master, and he's very experienced. All the way up. He's saying, Dini, I'm putting you out close, really close. So don't run. You hold against that. All the way up. He must have said it 3 times. I get up to the exit point. I was beyond static line. I think it was a clear and pull, and I pull, and I got my back to the target, and I look and I go, I'm not going to make it. And I hear his voice. Hold, Dini. And I'm like, okay, he knows what he's talking about. He knows. And I look, I'm not going to make it. And I hear him again. Hold. And then the 3rd time I look, I go, I'm not going to make it. And I turn, and that's when I see the hydro wires, and they're right in front of me. There's 2, and there's 1 there. They're right there. And the outside one hits the top of my helmet, and my lines wrap around it. I am swinging 3 feet off the ground. Within seconds, people from the parachute club show up, and they're like, don't touch her. And I'm like, why are they saying don't touch me? I'm 3 feet off the ground, and I undid one of the cape wells. All the lines in your parachute attach on both sides of your harness. You flick this part of the cape well. I can see your jumpers out there going, yeah, she knows what she's talking about. You flip this, flip that, and blunk, I'm hanging. Now I'm about 1.5 feet off the ground, swinging back and forth. I pulled this one, and I'm on the ground, and I'm fine. I got a bit of a jolt when I did it. Nothing, you know. Took me several years to realize that this is a 3-foot story. If I had been 3 feet higher, I would have got into the wires and I would have fried, right? Bzzzt. If I had been 3 feet lower, I would have grounded myself and I would have fried. I argue with my son that that's 2 of my lives. My son insists, it's only 1, Mom, because that was just 1 incident. So that's 1 of the many lives I've used up. Fate has been extremely kind to me in many areas. Not with husbands, but in many other cases, she's been extraordinarily kind. I flew that helicopter for 5,000 hours. 5,000 hours, okay? So in 5,000 hours, I am doing 6 traffic reports an hour. So 6 times an hour for 30,000 times, I am saying either the Parkway northbound is stop and go, or the Gardner westbound is stop and go, and trust me, they're going to be like that forever. I'm at the point where if I don't get out of this job, I'm going to kill myself because I'm bored. So I left, and I used that little bit of fame to go into television, and Moses and Eimer was clever enough to hire me. And I stayed with television for a long time. It was an extraordinary job, and I enjoyed it tremendously. 2 great privileges in my life. One, I've interviewed about 20,000 people. So I've talked to some of the most extraordinary minds and the most intelligent, wonderful people you could think of, and that was a great pleasure. If you go to YouTube and put my name in, you'll see I put up my favorite all-time interview, which was with, and you guys will know him, you're the right age, Mr. Red Skelton, who I became very close friends with. And the interview is the only 1-hour sit-down interview the man ever did. I also put up the interview with Omar Sharif, which is absolutely delightful. I put up some others, but they are up there, and that was great. But there's nothing in my life that has touched me the way that flying has. In spite of traffic northbound on the Parkway is stop and go, there was something about being there up alone and living in the clouds and becoming, I don't even know how to describe it. I've tried to write about it. There was we have slipped the surly bonds of earth is one of the most beautiful things. But unless you've experienced the thrill of being up there alone with just you and nothing else, I will tell you the most extraordinary experience. It's worth 5,000 hours of traffic reports for Uniroyal. I was flying down the Parkway one day from Buttonville, which we started flying out of the Spadina heliport, and then we moved up to Buttonville. And I usually flew at 1,800 feet, but I was flying about 1,600 because all the little puffy cumulus clouds all kind of joined together, and couldn't get any higher. I'm coming to the Bloor Viaduct, and I look up, and there's a hole the size of a football field, and I blip up without thinking about it. And I get above that hole, and it's early morning, it's maybe 7:30, and it's spring. And the top of those clouds are white and flat to the horizon in every direction. And the colors of the morning in the sky are those pinks and those oranges that you only get in spring. And I turned off all the radios, and I had my Zen moment where I was one with the universe. I marked the moment, so when I close my eyes, I can go back to that extraordinary moment. And that, I don't know how long I was there. I finally went, well, I better go back to work. Turned on the radios, blipped back down through the hole and went to work. But that one moment was worth 5 hours of traffic, 5,000 hours of traffic reports. It was an extraordinary time. I got to meet Kate through another hand of fate and destiny. When I went up to Buttonville and started flying, I met other women pilots, because they were all guys down at the heliport, all the boys and me. And for the first time, I ran into women who were, there weren't any helicopter pilots up there. I'm not the first helicopter pilot. I'm the second woman in Canada to get a commercial helicopter license. The other woman beat me by a week. I'm just so annoyed. I don't know how many commercial are passed beyond us, but there are very few. But it was amazing for me to get up to Buttonville and run into Heather Sifton and meet the 99s and see other women who were flying. It was like, yes, these are these fabulous women. And in the midst of them all was a woman named Betty Grapley, who I met. If I told you I remember her exactly, I wouldn't, but I remember meeting the women there that were pilots. So several years later, excuse me, I'm getting over this cold. I wasn't in China that long, really. It was just... Once upon a time where I live, a young lady had a problem, and I helped this young lady with her problem. And this young lady had a friend whose name was Kate Campbell. And I helped them through this rigmarole. It took a bit of time in fixing, but we got to know each other. And one day this young woman, Kate Campbell, came and sat in my apartment, and she started telling me about this project that she's been working on for 10 years, about these women, the WASP, that I had never heard of. I'd never heard of these women. I was like, really? That's extraordinary. And then Kate told me this story, that this project for film is actually, for Kate, is actually a love letter to her grandmother. And it was Betty Grapley who gave Kate her love of flying, because Betty was a pilot and a 99, so Kate is a pilot and a 99. And she's sitting in my apartment and telling me this wonderful story, and I'm like, that's just so amazing. And she starts telling me about this film, about these women who logged 60 million miles. And I'm like, my God, this is an extraordinary story. This story needs to be told. And then Kate looked at me and said, you know, my grandmother used to tell me lots of stories, a lot about Buttonville, and some about a little girl in a pink helicopter. And I'm like, no. That Kate's grandmother and I had known each other as the hand of fate, and as I said to Kate, the circle is complete. Kate Campbell is not only a writer and a director, she's an extraordinary singer, she's an actress, and what I loved about this film was not just the story, was the fact that most of the crew were women, and the gorgeous woman sitting beside Kate Campbell, please stand, Sarah Thompson Buffett, was the director of photography and producer, and is amazing. So there's a bit of a fundraiser. Here's something you don't know about me. I'm a poet in my heart of hearts. That's what I am. And this is a book that I wrote that was a bestseller for children. And it's an epic piece of poetry that takes me 6 minutes to recite, which I've done so often. I think I can do it backwards now. I'm getting pretty close. And it's for sale for $20, and the funds will go to Boundless if you have a grandchild. And I'd be happy to autograph it for you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a woman that I've come to admire and adore, It's Kate, isn't it? Kate Campbell. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kate Campbell.
Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome. Take it away.
Thank you.
You may have to sing now. I promise.
Hello. I'm going to start actually with the teaser that we shot in Los Angeles in 2018, just to show you a little bit of what the story is about. And then I will continue talking about the women and this project Boundless, which we just finished shooting in September. If I can get this to work.
Earthbound souls know only the underside of the atmosphere in which they live. But go higher, above the dust and the water vapor, and the sky turns dark until one can see the stars at noon.
Renowned aviatrix Miss Jacqueline Cochran has called in women pilots from across the nation who have at least 35 hours of flying time. You will join in her experimental training program that will have these girls fly actual military aircraft.
Do you really think women are better pilots than men?
Can a woman fly on her monthly time?
Can women pilots reach all the controls?
Get her down, now!
I'm not going back, Colonel, so until I have your word, you're all standing with your pants down in front of the national press, and it's a very cold day.
That was a beginning experiment of what, my first time taking this story off the page and into 3D, what was going to look like. But I'm going to echo it again, going back to the women pilots of where this all began, is that, and I know it's in your pamphlet, but from September 1942 to December 1944, over 1,000 women pilots flew every type of aircraft manufactured in North America and, were literally unrecognized. It was sort of this 2-year phenomenon. And they had to pay their own way there. They paid for a lot of their room and board. When 38 of them lost their lives, they had to pay for their own funerals because they were not considered a part of the military. And when they were finally disbanded, they had to pay their own way home. My grandmother, Betty Grepley, sparked my love of aviation, and she became a pilot in the 1950s behind my grandfather's back, my Italian grandfather. She'd pack him off to the stock market, and she would drive up to Buttonville. All the neighbors thought she was having an affair. She'd drive up to Buttonville and take flying lessons. And one morning, she presented her wings to him at the breakfast table, and he spewed his coffee across the room. So that's how she got her pilot's license. When my grandfather heard that her instructor was Italian, he kind of like cooled off a bit. He was like, okay, well, it can't be that bad. This was a woman whom everyone adored. It would take me too long to tell you all of the reasons why. I just remember how I felt in her presence, and the way she listened, and that whatever, I was saying was the most important thing to her in the world. And that really stays with you. It stays with you as a child. And I remember her telling stories about her flying and going sort of head-to-head with other male pilots, and I was always so proud of that. Like as a child, hearing her compare stories and notes with other male pilots, and I always thought that was really, really great. So a few years after she passed in 2003, I wanted to honor her with a story, and I thought, well, how hard could this be? How many women pilots are there, really? And so I started 10 years, it's been over 10 years now, of research. I moved to Los Angeles to continue my acting career around that time, and I got to meet some fascinating women. And the more I inquired, the more women I found. 10 long-term. But what I was the most shocked about was that I didn't know their history, specifically the women service pilots. I didn't know their history. Nobody seemed to know. It wasn't in any of the history books. And so I was really particularly drawn, and I fell in love with their stories. And, got to interview women all over the place, but particularly my favorite was Sweetwater, Texas. When we would go each Memorial Day weekend, I would go with a couple of friends and we'd film, the remaining women, and we would be on the field where they trained, for years we did this. And it got less of them and less of them as the years went on. But being on that same field and watching some of them go up in the planes that they had flown over 70 years ago on that very field, and watching them reminisce with each other and their families, extended families and grandchildren, it was really, really something. I have a lot of, I would deem it sort of home movie quality footage, but we put a little something together for those who couldn't make it, and we got to send it out to all of the women. I guess that was back in 2013. And so it's been really great to be in touch with them since then. A lot of them have passed. A lot of them I've interviewed have passed since then. One of my favorite interviews was Dorothy Olson, and she was in the New York Times this past summer. She lived to be 103, so she passed at 103 last year. And the New York Times did a piece on her life, and she was just so much fun. I remember the interview traveling up to Seattle in 2003 and sitting on her sofa, and we sipped lemon drop martinis, and it was just a very unconventional interview. She wanted a lemon drop martini, so we had lemon drop martinis. And she was just so funny and so carefree. And we sat, and she recounted her days as a women Air Force service pilot. And I just want to show you a little tiny clip of my favorite part. It's not much information, but I just thought it was so cute and moving. And she reminds me so much of my grandmother in this instance, the way that my grandmother, I was always so dramatic, and she would put a stop to that whenever I was, whenever my mom and I were getting into it or something like that. She was just always not taking herself too seriously, which I really could learn from. But anyway, she reminds me of her here, so I'll just show this little clip. Can we turn this up a little bit louder, do you think? I want to just sort of make sure there's enough volume. I think this... Oh,
it's a P-38 part.
I got it.
Nursefield counting door.
Now, what happened there again? Tell me.
Darned if I know.
The slow roll. But you weren't supposed to do it.
We weren't supposed to do acrobatics. We weren't supposed to get off of our flight plan, and boy.
What would you say to aspiring pilots?
What would I say to aspiring pilots?
Or anyone who just wanted to follow their dream, really?
I would tell them to focus on one thing and just go straight for it, and it'll happen.
I buy that. That's great.
It's really good.
Yeah. That's great. It's really good. Yeah.
She was just so lovely. She's in the calendar actually that's being passed around. I don't know what month she is, but Dorothy Olson is her name, and she's in the Women Air Force Service Pilots calendar that's going around. And that's her with the young men. They had never seen a woman pilot before, so they wanted a photo with her. So the WASPs were organized by Jackie Cochran. I don't know if any of you know who she is in the room. Anybody? A couple people? Okay. Very fascinating and complex human being. And if you've seen the documentary Mercury 13, you know what I'm talking about. It's a really fantastic, interesting documentary on a program that she started after the WASP. It was in the 60s, and it was an elite training program to send women to space. And it's an interesting story because this was sort of the information that I got over the years with interviewing different women who worked with her. She was just extraordinary, but she was so ferocious and very single-minded at the same time, and it was just such an interesting character study because when the women finally got the opportunity to go to space, she stood up in front of Congress, and because she couldn't be the first woman in space because of her health, she put a stop to the program and said women do not belong in space. So it's such an interesting human, and I've just been so fascinated with her because of what she was able to accomplish and push forward, and what we have as women to be able to move things forward, and then where the thing gets stopped. You know, it's just really fascinating documentary if you're interested. And so, but no one ever really talks about how close she was with Amelia Earhart, and I've done a lot of research there. They were very good friends. And Amelia would stay at her Coachella Valley estate with Jackie's husband, Floyd Odlum, who was a billionaire, and that's how Jackie got a lot of things pushed through, was her tenacious spirit. She was one of the greatest pilots. She was better than Amelia. She was one of the greatest pilots of all time and held more records than most of the men for her time. Anyway, Jackie and Amelia had what they described as an ESP connection. So when Amelia was flying, Jackie would almost go into a trance and write down where she thought Amelia would be on her flight path. And then Amelia would come back and confirm the notes, and she was absolutely blown away because they were 100% accurate. So, and Jackie's opinion on Amelia's death was that they hit the water. Fred Noonan was killed instantly, who was Amelia's co-pilot, and that Amelia had hit her head but wasn't killed yet. And was still alive, and she was trying to communicate where they might be, but no one was going to pay attention to her. You know, this was sort of ludicrous, especially at that time. And then she said she felt when she had passed. So that was really interesting. Fascinating woman. When I was living in Los Angeles, I've been there for about 11 years, I became a member of the Coachella Valley chapter of the 99s, and so that sort of steeped in that history of where she had her estate was really quite fun, and I've been to her estate and her graveyard, and so many things are just locked away in boxes, and I want to go through them. I have to find out who's going to let me do that. But there are so many stories about these women from all walks of life who came together to serve this country in this time of war. Not surprisingly, for that time, there were no African American women allowed to participate in this particular program. There were two Asian women, only two Asian women, and one Native American woman. And there was one Canadian member, as Patricia mentioned, was born in Brandon, Manitoba, and she held dual citizenship, was Anne Chisholm Desert Grant Oliver. She passed in she had a lot of husbands too. She passed in 1998. Some of my favorite stories of the fascinating time were then when word got out, when they were training in Sweetwater and they made this program happen. The men got word that there was this elite training program for women pilots, and so conveniently the men would be flying over and call emergency or mayday around 7:30 at night, and they would have to land on the field. So when they landed on the field, they would ask if they could have dinner with the women. And then to which Jackie replied, well, she sent them back to where they came from in a very expensive taxi cab at their own expense. And the women started calling it Cochrane's Convent. So when the women were finished their training, which took about 6 to 9 months, they would be placed in base camps all around the States. They would ferry coming back and forth to Montreal as well, so some places in Canada, but mainly within the US. And, you know, some of the men were thrilled and some of the men were absolutely not. And some of the women were even arrested. There's a report of the women being arrested for impersonating officers because the men had never seen anything like this before, and they were even flying the planes and they were still arrested. In 1944, the B-29 Superfortress was rushed through production, and the top Boeing test pilot at the time was killed piloting it, and so it was deemed unflyable. The men wouldn't get into it. And Colonel Tibbets knew that he needed the men to fly this plane to win the war. And so he taught 2 of the women to fly it. And Didi Mormon and Dora Doherty learned to manually start up this massive B-29 bomber, you know, because the engine kept catching fire and they had to do it manually. And so finally they learned to pilot it, and they landed it into Camp Davis, where the men just, you know, some of them quit on the spot, and some of them, you know, were just in awe, and then some of them were obviously excited to fly it. They knew they could fly it. So Colonel Tibbets got his team of pilots to pilot the B-29 bomber, and Enola Gay was painted on the side for its fateful flight. Yeah, so that's, you know, that's not in any of the history books either. And like all military records, the records of everything that the women did, that they contributed, were locked away for about 33 years after the war. And until President Carter in '77, I believe, finally granted, they were granted military status. And in 2009, they were given, the remaining members were given a Congressional Gold Medal under Obama. So 1 year ago, after we shot this teaser, 1 year ago, I decided to keep going with this project because I feel it deserves a voice. There have been a lot of documentaries, not a lot, there have been a few documentaries done on this piece, but not enough, not any, in fact, narrative pieces. And I find that narrative really moves the air, you know. For me, storytelling, good storytelling is really powerful. Not that documentaries don't, but there's something about narrative, for me at least, that I find to be quite gripping. And I was sitting in Los Angeles with Sarah, who is the DP and producer on this short film that we've just finished shooting. And it was a year ago that I asked her to be a part of this. It's about a year ago in LA. And it's been quite the journey since then. It's been a lot of hard work and a lot of fundraising, a lot of learning, a lot of, you know, asking people for help, which we got so much help. So it also stars Canadian broadcast icon Dini Petty, you know, who when I was getting Dini to endorse the project, we were doing fundraising, and I saw you delivering your lines, this brilliant woman who has done so much, who has accomplished so much, and you struggled a little bit with in the in-betweens, and that was when I knew I wanted you to play this character that I had written. It was so beautiful, and it was so genuine, and I thought, if you can do that, plus you're a pilot, there's no acting required. And I was so happy that you said yes. And, you know, I knew you were used to being in the spotlight and you're not fussed about cameras, so that was a good thing. But it was sort of a different side that I hadn't seen much of, you know, where it was just sort of a vulnerable private moment of a pilot, an older pilot looking back on her life at the moments that defined her, you know, during this time as a women Air Force service pilot. And yeah, I mean, we shot it, and you know, after the first take, I think, you know, the crew, I looked around and everyone had tears in their eyes, and we're like, oh, thank God. This is gonna be something really special, you know? And, but yeah, you blew everyone away, and it was really beautiful. The film was shot in Guelph and surrounding area. And the Niagara Military Museum, on our final day of shooting, they allowed us like sort of free reign of the armory there for the office scenes, which was really so gracious. Sim complete, Sarah brought on all of the camera equipment we got for free, which is unheard of, and really expensive, fantastic equipment. And we're working with really fantastic post-production companies that have come on because they believe in this piece. And you know, it's just, there are so many thank yous, and I think it's, you know, it's really quite, it's a movement that's happening, I think. So one of our 5 shoot days, we had 60 extras, 40 crew members, 10 cast members, and flying warplanes to deal with. And organized by pilot Alan Page and Al Micallef of the Hamilton Warplane Museum, and our aerial coordinator, amazing aerial coordinator, and pilot Cam Herod, which Sarah went up numerous times in both planes to get the shots we needed, which was super fun. And so the actors' performances were incredible. I'm so proud of what we were able to accomplish on such a small budget. There are literally hundreds of volunteers to help make this happen, and including one woman who flew herself out from Winnipeg for one day to be a woman Air Force service pilot for no pay. She was so excited to come and be a part of this in any way that she could, which was really, really beautiful. And the goal for this short film is that it will be, oh, I was supposed to start the slideshow, hold on. And that shows pictures from the film. But it's all good, we've got time. From beginning. Okay, so the goal for the short film is that it will, oh, I have to press play. It will be there's Dini. It will be a calling card for a mini-series version that I have in writing development. And that it will also do the film festival circuit. Is it gonna play on its own? Oh, I have to do it. It's all manual these days. What's happening? And the hope is that it will also inspire more women to take to the skies. I think it's important that young women especially to start to see themselves in this type of story. There aren't, you know, for me growing up, I was so moved by A League of Their Own, and it launched a whole athletic career for me because of that movie. And I just think there's the girls, and I just think the narrative version of this is a really important piece. let me just go back to this. This is when, so nobody had seen the warplanes yet, the cast, nobody. So we kind of blocked them, and we had 2 camera crews going, and then the warplane came in. This is a Harvard, and it came in and no one had seen it, so it was really beautiful to capture that at first, their first reaction to it. And that's the younger version of Dini. The flashback version. You guys look very similar. This is the Niagara Military Museum. And there's Sarah. So Sarah got in the planes and she was just a rock star. You know, could not have done this without her. It's really rare to have a woman director of photography. Actually, what is the percentage? 1% of all the industry is women director photographies. And there are different areas where it's sort of getting better now, but some areas where we still have a long way to go. Yeah. And we are still fundraising for this. And you know, if you would like to make a donation, or if you'd like to buy a book, or if you'd like to know about more information, or if this would speak to you, you could come up and say hello, or you could visit katecampbellfilmmaker.com and you can make a donation via PayPal there. So in the middle of the night 2 summers ago, when I was at my wit's end trying to finish the teaser in the edit process, I stumbled upon this quote from Jackie Cochran, and it still moves me deeply every time I hear it, because it translates, it's meant for aviation, but it translates into so many other realms, that this is what we have the opportunity to do as a human race at this time in history. As leaders, as people who are very lucky, and people who have more influence than we know. Earthbound souls know only the underside of the atmosphere in which they live, but go higher, above the dust and the water vapor, and the sky turns dark until one can see the stars at noon. Thank you so much. Come on up, Dini. We're going to do Q&A. Yeah, any questions? We've got, Dini's going to come back up. Oh yeah, we're going to just pass it back. Yeah.
I might have this wrong, but in Googling earlier today about wasps, I thought I read that all of them had been U.S. federal employees initially. Is that correct? And if
No.
So,
Yes?
No? And so if, I thought, well, if that is the case,
yeah.
that information was there would mean that a percentage of them were. And there must have been some sort of contract, some sort of paperwork that would have So they
To
were
protect
not-
them? No.
So none of
They had to have, what was it, 15 hours?
Yeah, they had a minimum of 30.
Minimum of 30 hours. Some of
30
them,
hours flying time minimum.
yeah, some of them were school teachers, some of them
Yeah.
were housewives who were crop dusters' wives who have been taught to fly. Some were aristocrat, like very well off and just wanted to do this exciting thing. Really, there was a vaudeville, like it was just all walks of life, which is so fascinating.
Anyone in the rooms who's a pilot appreciates that, you know, you get checked out on one aircraft or helicopter, it takes you a while. They flew every kind that came off the line. I mean, it's an extraordinary accomplishment. Only girls could have done it, I guess. There's a question from the front, sir.
Yes. I know a lot of Canadian women, we didn't have an organization as such, but RAF Ferry Command was operating out of Montreal, and some Canadian women did join it, and their job even included flying aircraft across the Atlantic to the other side.
If they would, to join the ATA is what I understand, that they would have been a part of that affiliation as well,
And then
because,
go into Ferry Command.
pardon me?
And then go into Ferry Command?
But it would have been just with Britain, like just
yeah,
overseas.
yeah, I know.
Yeah. But they weren't allowed to fly for, the Royal Canadian Air Force was not, they wouldn't,
Yeah.
you know.
I just wondered if you might have a few words about Ferry Command.
I haven't researched it as in depth as this just because I've been in the States for so long, but yeah.
Yes, sir.
Do you know when they took the aircraft overseas from, I guess, the United States to Britain, did they fly them empty or did they fly them laden? Did they take passengers?
They would oftentimes fly them empty and mostly right off the line. They would also be, very few of them went overseas of this particular group of women. They were mainly stationed at bases to pick up and deliver within North America, but they would be, you know, used as tow targets, as, you know, practice for strafing missions, and, you know, so not carrying passengers. Or cargo, no.
Okay, if there's no other, oh, yes,
Were
sir.
any trained as navigators or radio operators, or were they all pilots?
They all had that training as well. They all had navigational training. They all had a lot of hours on very different aircraft. I mean, from big bombers to, you know, just from their trainers as well, like the T6s and P-38s.
Once again, just to go back to the funding, if you know anyone in the aviation field who doesn't know this story and would like to be a part of it, please go to Kate Campbell filmmaker.com. I knew that.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We're in the sort of the final stages of it, and we'll hopefully be finished soon. And then, as I said, we'll be touring the film festival circuit and then using it as a tool, a marketing tool for a much larger project.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patricia. It's really been a pleasure.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.